Attorney General Alan Wilson, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
What does success look like to you? How do you define success?
Well, first off, before you can see where you want to go, you have to look back and see where you've been. And when I came into this job in 2010, there was no human trafficking law on the books in South Carolina. There was no human trafficking task force. I did not run on a platform of combating human trafficking because I didn't know it was an issue that needed addressing here in South Carolina. Like so many people, human trafficking was one of those crimes that happened in Hollywood. It was a surreal crime, and if it did happen, it happened in major metropolitan cities around the United States, like Chicago or L.A. or Atlanta, maybe. It happened in third world countries in Eastern Europe, and traffickers were Russian mafia, and victims were always girls backpacking through Europe, and so I didn't see it as something that really needed to be addressed. And of course, I got elected and started working with a number of people in the General Assembly and folks in the law enforcement community as well as other industries, and quickly realized that South Carolina was in dire need of a human trafficking law. And so we, in 2012, lobbied for and got passed the Human Trafficking Act, which empowered this office to chair the Human Trafficking Task Force. It also gave the ability for the office to go after human trafficking as a crime. And then from 2013 on, we've been publishing reports every year about the scope of human trafficking in this state, and then we've been trafficking metrics, because you can't manage a problem until you measure the problem. And so we started measuring it, and one data point, and then we got 2 data points, and then 3, and we started to see trends, and now we're starting to kind of get a better understanding of how bad human trafficking actually is. So you go from 2010 to 2020. The way I view human trafficking is completely evolved. I've come 180 degrees. And I think a lot more people out there are far more aware of human trafficking as a real world problem in the state of South Carolina, or any state for that matter, than they were 10 years ago. So, when you see where we want to be, I look at where we've come from, and we've come from a place of complete ignorance. We've come from a place of, South Carolina being ranked one of the worst states in the country for combating human trafficking, to now, in my opinion, being the gold standard, or at least a model for other states to emulate. And now we're leading in many respects. And a few years ago, our state was recognized number 1 in the country for the passage of human trafficking laws in South Carolina. And so, we've come so far. So first I want to say how grateful I am to have been in this office and seen the evolution of human trafficking as a industry be recognized for what it is, and how we have risen to the task of fighting it. Now, what do the next 10 years look like? Obviously, I think the more attention we bring to this, the more awareness that people have of this crime, the more tools, the more resources we provide in the war on human trafficking, you're going to see not only a lot more awareness, but you're probably going to see statistically more cases being brought. You're going to be seeing more victims, more traffickers traffickers brought to justice, and victims becoming survivors. And it's going to scare people because, as now that people are aware of it, they're going to be looking for it, and we're going to be engaging it more. And so you're going to see more of it. But that's not to say that it wasn't always happening.
One thing that you get a lot of credit for from a lot of people is that you're very collaborative, that you have a lot of friends throughout the country, and you consult with a lot of colleagues. So have you been able to collaborate with them on this issue, and do you see any best practices from other states that you'd like to incorporate here?
I'm very lucky to be in a position where I can collaborate with prosecutors and law enforcement leaders from all over the country, both at the local and state levels as well as the federal level. And so, being at the table, having a seat at the table to communicate and talk with people has informed me a great deal about where South Carolina should go. It was going to a National Association of AG meeting, Attorney General's meeting about 9 years ago, where I got to meet a human trafficking victim, where I heard her harrowing story of how she was rescued from the lifestyle. And this is a girl that wasn't kidnapped. She slept in her bed every night in her house. And it was hearing her story that really kind of not empowered me, but it kind of shocked me into action, which was when I came back from that conference of AGs, I was able to go and engage members of the General Assembly and really get behind these laws. And so that was probably the first example of collaborating with people in other states, other AGs and other folks, other states who had already passed laws, working with folks from Polaris, Project.org, and other organizations to really kind of push a comprehensive human trafficking law. And then, of course, as we started to implement the law, and as I was talking to some of my colleagues, I realized that there were gaps. There were things that the first time you do something, you're going to miss things. And that's part of the evolution, the growth. We all, as you implement a system, you start to realize where the system is flawed. So one of the first things we did about a year after we implemented the Human Trafficking Act was we realized that we didn't have the ability to use the state grand jury, which is important because, for instance, a solicitor has to stop at the county line or at the circuit line. They only have jurisdiction within the 2 or 3 counties that they represent. Human traffickers, they don't exactly adhere to jurisdictional boundaries when they're selling a victim. From my house in Lexington to here, I go through 4 different jurisdictions just to get to my job. Traffickers and victims of trafficking do the same thing. They travel on a 10, 15, 20, 30-mile radius, and they're going to be in different municipalities, different counties, different jurisdictions. And so the state grand jury law that we were able to pass a number of years ago that improved the grand jury, the Trafficking Act, allows us to do multi-jurisdictional cases at one time. So now a solicitor doesn't have to have, can look at a case that started in their circuit but then went outside the circuit lines. And so we were able to do that. And that's what our office does with the grand jury. As we talk to other states and as members of my staff collaborate with their colleagues and peers in other states, we are picking up best practices along the way, a tweak here and an addition there. You're constantly improving your war machine, as I call it.
So that said, let me ask you this. If you could, we both know what it's like to work the General Assembly and have to massage that machine. It's tough. If you could go over there and just have a magic wand and you could just have like one Mac Daddy thing that would change human trafficking as far as what the General Assembly could put in your toolbox, what would it be?
I'd have an entirely resource-staffed human trafficking division within the Office of the Attorney General, with trained law enforcement investigators, prosecutors, program coordinators for raising public awareness to investigating and prosecuting these cases, to going into schools. A comprehensive, robust program to really go out there and change the culture in our state when it comes to detecting human trafficking, educating on human trafficking, prosecuting on human trafficking. And then, of course, what do you do after the case is over? A lot of these victims of human trafficking, they go from, having been a trafficking victim for 2, 3, 10 years, depending on how long they were in the lifestyle. A lot of them don't have high school diplomas. They were maybe on the streets for a number of years. Some of them may have children from multiple fathers. They have no education. A lot of them have, criminal records because when you're in that lifestyle, you've been arrested for prostitution. You might have been arrested for drug dealing because that's how you're being used. And it's very difficult for them to have a job. It's very difficult for them to be not only get a job but get an education. How do they dig themselves out of the hole? So it's kind of like, when you rescue, an animal from the wilderness, you just can't if you rescue an animal, you just can't release it into the wilderness unless you've given it the tools to go out there and to go out and survive. And so a lot of these young women and young men, they've been in a lifestyle where they haven't developed basic skills to cope and survive in our society. And then, we prosecute the bad guy, we put the bad guy in jail, and then we tell the victim that's got 2 kids, is basically halfway living on the street already. Good luck. Let us know how it goes. And so how we get them back to a place of being back in society.
If you don't live it as a prosecutor and see it, do you think you really, or to go back to your example, you see Taken and you think that it's just this kind of crazy one-off. You don't realize that it's in every community. It's at the local store, where it's on the street corners where it's happening in your neighborhood.
Well, every year we publish our annual human trafficking report, and we have a lot of statistics in there, and we announce the top 5 counties where reports were made on the hotline. We talk about the main ways that victims manifest and traffickers manifest. The familial or family connection is usually there. Like you said, you mentioned Taken a minute ago. Where Liam Neeson goes over to Europe to kill everyone in the mafia that kidnapped his daughter, one of the myths I try to shatter is that no, human trafficking happens here, and it's not some organized crime syndicate that's kidnapped the daughter or son. It's a local gang, or maybe a couple living in an apartment complex on the other side of the track, or a family member, or an uncle, or a cousin. It's easy to stereotype victims as runaways. I've even done that in this interview. I've talked about that, but there are a lot of victims who are being victimized, but they've never been kidnapped. And a lot of victims, this is something that really surprised me as I've talked to more victims, didn't know they were victims of human trafficking when it was going on.
It's a huge issue.
It's a huge issue. I mean, it's like, they in hindsight, in retrospect, they're like, oh my goodness, I was a victim of human trafficking. So when I go and I talk to members of the General Assembly, I'm talking to them the way I'm talking to you right now. And I'm telling them these stories. And, listen, it's an incredibly bipartisan issue. I've been incredibly pleased with the people from all political stripes in the General Assembly who've been incredibly supportive legislatively. Obviously we have competing interests with every other state agency, and there's only so much money to go around. But every year that we have gone to them and asked them for something, generally they do as much as they can to help support us to grow this organization. Obviously, you have to do it in base hits. You can't always hit a home run in one year and get everything you want, but we're chipping away at our needs list. And they've been very open and very receptive to helping us meet our mandate.
Assume right now that there's a girl scrolling through social media and she's watching your interview, and you have 20 seconds to capture her attention, to give her some hope. What do you tell her?
If someone's listening to me right now who thinks they might be, or has discovered they may be, a victim of human trafficking, you're not alone. There's an army of people out there who want to help you, who want to support you. There's organizations out there. If you even suspect that you or someone that you care about is fallen into this lifestyle and don't know how to get out of it, I can encourage you to call the human trafficking hotline. I can encourage you to call local law enforcement. Call the Attorney General's office and ask to speak to someone in the human trafficking section. I mean, we will get you to those people, but we have our hand extended out to people to help them if they need help, and we want you to know that you're not alone, that there is a way to get out of this lifestyle, and we want to be there to help you.
They're not alone.
They're not alone. You're not alone.
Attorney General Alan Wilson, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.